Thank you for that intro, and thank you, PyCon, for bringing me here from the States. Kind of glad to hang out in Canada for a little while. Things are a little bit chaotic back home. I'd kind of, yeah, right? People are joking about moving here, and I posted like, hi everyone from Canada. That was very fun. I don't want to move here, but I've had a really warm welcome, which is appreciated, especially given the topic of this talk, which is about inclusion. So before I begin, I'd kind of like to get a sense of who you are and where you're coming from in terms of your interest in this topic and how you might want to apply these kinds of things at your own organization. Could I get either a show of hands or just shout out like what you're, like, are you a hiring manager? What are you thinking about in terms of diversity? What are you hoping to get out of this? Yes?
Perspective from the potential employee, basically what guys are looking for.
Okay. What an employee might be looking for.
Yeah, well, basically looking from other perspective, I'll be looking for a job once I graduate.
Oh, okay.
So
I'm a recruiter. I'm very helpful for that perspective of what we're thinking about at that end. And for what it's worth, if anyone wants to find me after the talk, I'm here to be helpful in my capacity as someone who understands how hiring managers are thinking. Anyone else?
I read your book
Oh, wow. Well, thank you.
and gave away 6 copies.
That's awesome. Thank you. Anyone? Yes.
I'm a hiring manager and building up a new team. So trying to get a different perspective on how to be more effective in that.
All right. You know, well, I've been accused of a lot of things in my life. I've never been accused of not having a unique perspective. If you've come here to get a different point of view, I can guarantee that I will bring that for you. Here's a little bit about me for folks who may not know who I am. I'm a serial tech entrepreneur. I got started at GeekCore in 1999. I'm almost 40. And more recently started a company called Glimpse. I joined Brandon Ike at Brave to help get it launched. I got my start at Everyday Health about 10 years ago. And right now I'm doing entrepreneurship. I'm building a new division for diversity recruiting inside a larger, more stable company. And as the gentleman had mentioned, I published this book, Lean Out. I'll have 2 copies for sale at the end. And that's all about the struggle for gender equality in tech and startup culture. And that's really how I came to get into this. I collected these stories and saw just how intense it is for marginalized people in technology. All right, managing diverse teams. Let's start there. How do you do it? It's hard enough to manage a team when everyone is already coming from the same point of view. You know, management is very difficult. We're here in a whole school dedicated to the art of how to be a better manager. And then when it comes to managing teams where not everybody's the same, it gets to be trickier. Forgive this image. I love this image of all the different animals getting along. And I've always wondered how they got all of the birds to sit still next to that dog under the blanket. Like, that is spectacular pet management. And they're all friends, right? Like, they're all different. They're all different kinds of animals, but they're all getting along because they're part of the same household. They have like a unique culture, which is that household. And they clearly trust each other. I don't see any toxic employees there. And I guess that someone's holding them all accountable. Accountability in the last one actually refers to something else. We'll get through that. But these are the points that I found around how to manage in an organization when you have a diverse set of people, but you're trying to find a common goal. So how do you create a commonality in the workplace? So the easiest path, and the path that's followed by most companies, is you have a homogenous group of people who get along. They all went to school together, they all went to Stanford, or they were all Googlers together, and then they found a company, and they hire more people who are like them. They do referrals, and they hire people from inside their network, and you still get difficulties and squabbles. Management is hard no matter what. But they all have a shared set of values, right? And that makes a lot of things easier. It's simpler. But you run into problems when your teams aren't diverse. And so people care a lot about diversity now. I'm not really digging into the whys of that because I think that that's been really well covered. If you have an interest or question in why diversity matters, why it's interesting, you can find me later and I'd be happy to share resources or have that conversation. For now, I'm kind of assuming we're all on board with the why, and the question is how. So what do you do when everyone on your team is different, but you want everyone to get along and to be motivated together? Well, you create a unique workplace culture. I think Zappos is just one of the best examples of this. Here you have the CEO, Tony Sett, with, what is that, a llama? Zappos has a work culture that values being unique and being weird. And they've even made that very explicit. What I like about that is it's a set of values that all kinds of people can rally around. So what makes you part of the Zappos family isn't necessarily that you went to Stanford or MIT or have a computer science degree, or your family has a certain demographic, but it's a set of shared values. Those shared values include, and they have a list, like 10 shared values, they're very public about it: create fun and a little weirdness, be adventurous, creative, and open-minded, be humble, and do more with less. Now, what I find so exciting about their list is it's not just like saying nice words. Like, you can say a company's values are excellence, but of course everyone's values will be excellence. You could say it'll be efficiency, but that doesn't mean anything, and it doesn't mean that the company will actually be efficient. These are values that actually distinguish Zappos from other companies. If you go to Wall Street in New York, my hometown, create weirdness is not a core value. It's not. And so what Zappos has done is they've made something that really sets them apart as different. And so everyone has the possibility to be included in that. And the other thing I really love is it's very accessible. That's part of why culture fit can be so tricky and so problematic. So many times when companies talk about culture fit, it's a way to exclude people who are older, or people who don't drink, or people who are disabled. Culture fit is this way to talk about pattern recognition without really admitting to it. But when you create a set of shared values that anyone can be part of, it's a good recipe for inclusion. I think that Zappos has done a really good job, but there are a lot of companies that do this, and it's something to think about if you're in a position to be a hiring manager or to set culture at your company. It really creates a sense of in-group. You can't get away from that. You can't get away from the fact that when you have a team, you're trying to have everybody get along and work hard together. You want a sense that you're part of a family, you're part of a group, and that means something. That it's different to be in the group than to be outside of the group. It's part of a family to be at Zappos. It means something to be part of Zappos, but I can't think of anyone in the world who wouldn't be able to fit in if they really wanted to. And that's not true of every kind of company culture. Now, trust is also really important. All teams need psychological safety. This is true for every team. Every team needs this. Everyone in the team needs to feel like they can show up to work and they're going to be in a safe environment, not just physically, that there won't be toxic mold or that they're not going to be in a dangerous situation. Setting aside firefighters and people who know that they're taking that on. We're technologists, right? Like, we're Python coders. We code Python, we want to show up to work. I mean, it's a physically safe thing. But is it emotionally safe? It's not always emotionally safe. It could be the case that people aren't going to respond to your pull request, or that they aren't going to deal with the bugs that you filed. It could be any number of things that can happen. But this is even more important in diverse teams. And I think it's really interesting why. Because in diverse teams, it can be the marginalized people who end up being bullied. Psychological safety means these things: the ability to ask questions, to feel safe when reporting an issue, to support your teammates, that team members get credit for their work, and that team members don't need to shift blame. Now, all of this is really nice to see, but the truth is, in a lot of work environments, it just doesn't happen. I've been in so many work environments. I've been working since I was 13. My very first job was with Ricky Kaplan. He had just gotten out of white-collar prison. I've seen a lot of things. I don't know why my family thought that that was an appropriate job for me, but I guess it worked out. I learned a lot. I was treated like a grown-up. It was good. But I've seen a lot of things, and I've seen that not every work environment is psychologically safe. Now, you need psychological safety because it's hard for people to stand up for women and people of color. Sheryl Sandberg has talked about this, and a lot of research has been done. For women to stand up and champion other women, they're putting themselves on the line, making themselves look like feminists. But for other people, there's still a bit of a cost. For whatever reason, there's still a cost right now to step up and back the opinion of a person who isn't in the majority. So you need to create a lot of psychological safety in the team if you're going to support all the people who maybe are a little bit different. And you need that difference for all the reasons why diversity matters. If you don't support the different people on the team, you're not getting the value of their perspective, of their opinion. They may as well not be there. Why are you paying for them if you're not going to listen to them? Which leads to this. This is true for every kind of a team, for every company, and it's one of the hardest things to do. So much of what we talk about with management best practice is really obvious and easy in theory, but then when you have to do it, it's really hard. Has anyone here ever had to fire anyone? You fired? What did it feel like?
I would rather have quit my job myself.
Right?
It actually felt really good. It was a really toxic person.
There you go. So I love firing people. That's kind of a horrible thing to say, but like when it has to happen, I'm really glad to do it and do the hard thing and move on. But it feels awful. It's like you'd rather do anything than fire the person. And so a lot of people just don't. You know, a lot of companies don't fire toxic people. And it's not only because it's hard. Toxic people can be litigious. You know, it's really hard to fire someone because then they might sue. It's a whole can of worms. And so for a lot of reasons, people don't get rid of toxic employees. But you really, really have to, not only because you have to, but you have to for diversity. You have to because toxic employees bully the most vulnerable. They are a tremendous hazard to inclusivity, and they impact everyone on the team. One of the most surprising things that's happened for me since I started doing diversity work has been not only, you know, the young African American women, the people of color, all kinds of young women who've approached me and said, what you're doing really speaks to my own experiences, but a lot of young white men who I would not think would really see themselves as part of the inclusivity movement, they've come to me and they've said, I don't like to be in workplaces where there's a bully. I don't like to be in workplaces where everybody's going to a strip club. And that was a real surprise, and I think it's really important for us to understand how much these toxic employees and the kind of toxic culture that can surround them, how it hurts everyone. You know, it's not just the people you think of as being marginalized. So toxic employees really do bully the most vulnerable, which makes a lot of sense, right? It's not surprising. So if you want a diverse team and you want it to be harmonious, then obviously you can't have a bully interrupting what would otherwise be a good environment. So I guess if you need to fire someone and it's hard, just call me and I'll do it for you. I'm a consultant. I can do like pretty much anything for anyone's company. And I'll come in, I'll explain that, you know, we're trying to have a nice workplace and you're not nice. well, we can work out the exact details. You don't want to say too much because you don't want to give them a reason to push back with a lawsuit. So I'll just say, like, you haven't been nice. We'll talk to the lawyers first, make sure that's okay. So yeah, I'm here with all kinds of helpful services. This is maybe a little less relevant to some of you, but I think it's important. When it comes to diversity at a company, it's not only accountability throughout the organization, it really comes from the top. Now Disney keeps winning all of these awards. Disney is now one of the best places for diversity. I was like, oh, that's kind of interesting. Well, why is that? The CEO, Bob Iger, is accountable for diversity at Disney. It's something that is a top line for the CEO. Now, this makes sense, right? Like, diversity impacts the share price, it impacts the bottom line, it impacts whether, like, the product gets proper QA to serve all of the people who might use it. So it makes sense that the board of directors, the CEO, should be accountable, but that just doesn't happen very often. So what's happened at Disney now that the CEO is accountable for diversity? It's showing up in the product, it's showing up in the films, as well as in the teams. I took a look, I can't believe the diversity in the films coming out of Disney right now. And so much of that is because it's throughout the whole organization, it's coming from the top down. This matters to you as people who might be looking at where to work, because you can look at the management and that will tell you what's going to happen at the organization. So for you, as you think about where you want to be, I would look and say, who's leading this organization? Do I like their values? I'm not saying diversity has to be your value, whatever your values are. How does the leadership think about it? So let's talk about building your diverse team. I'm going to move through this quickly so we can get to questions, but I'm on Twitter, I'm on LinkedIn, you can ask me anything. The first step is to define your goals. Seems obvious, but what does diversity mean, right? What does it mean to you? What does it mean at your organization? Why does it matter? They look pretty grim. I think they should add some happy people. But they would probably make some better decisions if they had some other perspectives. So that could be a reason why you care about diversity. And it could be, you just think it's the right thing, which is the case at a lot of companies. They're doing it for social reasons. Now, how do you source candidates? Well, a lot of people do employee referrals, and then you just get clones, which actually is easy for everyone to get along because everyone has so much in common, but you miss out on, all the richness you get when you actually reflect your customer base. So how do you find diverse talent? This will be relevant if any of you are ever in a position where you need to be doing that. Well, you can hire someone like me, but often you can't work with outside recruiters. It turns out that's one of the biggest reasons why it's hard for companies to source diverse talent. I talked to a lot of great companies and they really want to make things better, but they can't bring in external resources. So their hands are tied. So what do? If you actually really want to go outside your referral network, you've got Pie Ladies, Black Girls Code, Meetup, Hackbright, LinkedIn. I'm on LinkedIn all day when I'm trying to look for people. The downside is all of this takes a lot of time. So it's not like there's so much mystery as to how to hire people and how to hire diverse people, but companies sometimes don't feel like they have the luxury of taking that time. That's one of the biggest reasons why it doesn't always work out. It's not because it's impossible, it's just very labor intensive. You have to really care. But there are no shortcuts to any place worth going. Let's take questions. Yes.
So we have a microphone.
Thank you. Yeah, we have a moderator to help with this. Thank you.
So you said you have to get rid of toxic employees.
Yes.
Okay, so Edward Snowden would have been regarded as toxic by most of his colleagues at the NSA because he constantly complained. And the first person to bring up diversity in any non-diverse workplace is almost certainly regarded as a troublemaker. What do you do?
Yeah, I'm glad that you asked that. I thought about that as I put this talk together, and didn't get into it because it's a lengthy topic, but this is important. Now, often it's the people who represent diversity. It's the people who are a little bit different who can be looked at as the troublemakers and tried to be kicked out of the organization. So it's really important to understand the difference between a toxic employee and an employee who's just a little bit different and maybe noticing things that are really important. The truth is that Snowden actually was toxic for the NSA, but good for the country, at least from my point of view. I understand that that's a controversial thing kind of outside this subject. But for what it's worth, Snowden really was creating a lot of trouble inside the NSA. And it's understandable how they may have had to fire him if they wanted to have harmony inside their organization. I think the first step is for your organization to just not do what the NSA does. But more seriously, you're raising a serious point. A bully inside an organization will often go after the marginalized people, will complain about them to management, try and get them fired. It's important to take a step back and figure out who the toxic employees actually are. The toxic employees are the people who are taking credit for other people's work, who aren't doing teamwork and making an effort to get along. Just because someone's having trouble doesn't mean that they're toxic. It takes work to create inclusivity for people who are different. If you're making your first African American hire, or your first gay or lesbian hire, or your first hire of any person who doesn't fit into your existing culture, that's going to take some work, and companies need to understand that. I think that's where trying to create a strong culture around things like weirdness or fun or adventure or like anything where anyone can fit in becomes important. It gives those people an opportunity to be included and gives the bullies less to work with.
Other questions?
Yes. Oh.
How do you talked earlier about sharing values more than backgrounds, and I like the idea of sort of explicitly stating what a company's values are. How do you sort of sanity check that later to see that you're still actually, staying true to those values?
Yeah, look at Google, right? Like their value is don't be evil, and I love a lot of the things that Google does, but that became ultimately untenable for a company of that size and that scale and magnitude of impact. So that's actually a board level question in many respects. It's a question of very high level strategy, and it's hard. It's really hard. I think the first step is to set your organization up in a way where you can uphold your values. If like I ran an encryption company, and so one of our values was privacy for our users, and we had to really construct the product around that. And then we hired around that. We hired for people who held privacy as a value, which was great because it was something that anybody could hold to. It was an inclusive thing. And I guess the board and anyone else on the team who cares and thinks about this would need to come together and evaluate their impact and evaluate whether they need to make product changes. Because the problem is we don't always foresee, like Google didn't foresee the impact of ads. They didn't foresee the impact of how they were making money. I happen to think that setting out how you're going to make money in a way that's consistent with your values really prevents that kind of problem. But honestly, I worry about any company, whether they'll be able to hold on to their values over time. It's really hard. That's a great question. Thank you.
Trying to spread them all out.
My question is about diversity in hiring. Specifically, two things that have come up recently at the place where I work are that salary negotiations, as well as some types of like whiteboarding exercises, can often be to the detriment, specifically gender-based, like where women won't do as well or have as positive of outcomes. I'm curious to know what your thoughts are on those types of activities while you're doing recruiting and hiring, and if there are ways to do them the right way, or if they should be something that you should just kind of find alternatives for.
That's absolutely right. Part of the problem we're having now is that hiring practices were designed without diversity in mind. and they don't take into account people's different styles. And negotiations certainly has been proven to be different between men and women. So it's challenging. Some transparency in pay can help with that. I encourage people to take a look at Glassdoor and see what the salary ranges tend to be for what they're doing. And for companies, it's on them to take extra steps to have parity in compensation. That's something that some companies are doing. They're taking a look at the compensation between men and women in their organizations, people of all genders in their organizations, and making an effort to make sure that men and women doing the same jobs at the same seniority levels are getting the same pay. It may cost those organizations a little bit more, but it's a social good that they're able to do, and it will help them retain some of these better people. When it comes to hiring, we have a lot of work to do around improving hiring practices. I'm interested and in favor of an exercise where you give people a small project and you pay them for it. So give someone a small exercise, something that would take maybe 2 to 3 hours, give it to them on a Friday and ask them to submit it on a Monday or a Tuesday. And that actually lets you see what they're like when they're working. Some people don't perform well on a whiteboard. Some people don't perform well on interviews. And conversely, some people are great in interviews and they're terrible employees. And so our interviewing really should better reflect what it's like to work with someone. So why not give them a sample project and just start that? Now, it remains to be proven whether that will be detrimental for women and minorities, but I tend to think that it would serve them well.
Another question from this side of the room?
The gentleman in the second row.
Yeah, I'm coming. I'm just trying to spread it out.
I don't mean to make you exercise so hard.
No. How much more time do we have?
All right. So my question is basically, you sort of assume that we're dealing with, I guess, low-level employees in the talk, but what happens when the management itself is toxic?
That's a good question, and unfortunately, that happens, right? That happens often enough. Now, when management is toxic, sometimes it's up to the board to get rid of them. Wow, toxic management is a really hard problem, mostly because you usually can't do anything about it. So if you're inside an organization and there's toxic management above you, I'm a recruiter, call me. If you're in an organization and there's toxic management like at your peer level, then it's a question of whether you can remove them. The truth is that it's really, really hard and high profile to remove toxic management. And when I think about toxic management, I usually think about like, how do I remove myself, or how do I remove the candidate or the employee or the person I care about from that situation? And is it just one toxic manager? When I look at the companies where there's a toxic CEO, you've got a board of directors who's supporting that person. You have a set of co-founders and other C-suite people who are supporting that person. In my experience, it's been rare to see like one toxic executive and then like everyone else is great. What you tend to see is something like Twitter, where actually I love Twitter and I love Jack Dorsey and there's so many great people there, but there have been so many management problems for so long that the whole thing is just a mess. You can't even point anymore at who's making the problems. I mean, maybe people inside Twitter have a more close idea, but in general, once you get toxic management, you end up just get out of there. All right, thank you so much. Thank you so much for coming. Thank you so much for caring about these issues. And again, you're welcome to stay in touch with questions, and I have 2 copies of my book if anyone would like to pick one up today. Thanks.